Second in the series discussing the book Waterway, a new translation of the Tao Te Ching, and introducing the Wu Wei Jing by Kuo Hsiang. That's my attempt to pronounce this name over here. The Wu Wei Jing, well, Wu Wei means non-action. It's one of the central concepts of philosophical Taoism. You find it in one form or another in Lao Tzu, and also it's a primary focus of one of my favorite books of all times. Put it in my top 5, let's say, at least, is the Chuang Tzu. And I do recommend Burton Watson's translation from the 1960s. It's really quite wonderful. It'd be good to get the whole translation. This is selections. I like the outer chapters as well as the inner chapters of the Chuang Tzu very much. Kuo Hsiang lived around 300 AD, as we reckon it in the West. And he's responsible for the Chuang Tzu canon as it has come down to us at this point. Probably there were sort of a vast swath of texts maybe associated with Chuang Tzu up until that point. And Kuo Hsiang also produced a commentary on the Chuang Tzu. And it's selections from that text that I'm assembling, sort of by analogy to the Tao Te Ching, into 80 brief chapters. Now, I said that I did an incredibly, I and people I knew did an incredibly painstaking analysis of each chapter of the Tao Te Ching. Here I just kind of looked for all the fragments I could find of Kuo Hsiang's commentary on the Chuang Tzu in, Winsett John's Source Book in Chinese Philosophy, Feng Yulan's translation of the Chuang Tzu, and other sources, and I freely construed them. Much more spontaneous, whether it's a translation or a version or something, I'm not quite sure. Maybe it doesn't matter that much, especially given the doctrines that are expressed in the Chuang Tzu itself, in Kuo Hsiang. All right, I think in many ways it's the best philosophical statement of Taoism. As well as being like sort of a beautiful piece of semi-practical, profound advice, a la Lao Tzu. Kuo Hsiang was supposed to be is supposed to have been an official, and he's also supposed to have said that Confucius is the greatest sage, which I think these are factors that perhaps have led people to dismiss him or not look deeply enough into him. Really, I think a lot of the project is to try to make Taoism, and particularly this concept of non-action, practical in a way that could, comport with you having a job or something like that. But while also purporting to be a true interpretation of non-action as it's portrayed in the Chuang Tzu. Furthermore, it uses Wu Wei, the concept of non-action, as a way of understanding the universe as a whole. It gives a metaphysics that I think is as profound as any I've ever seen. I mean, when I first ran into a couple passages of this, I think in John's source book, I was bowled over. And I would say, I've been working up a system of philosophy called entanglements, that includes some metaphysics, and I would say Kuo Hsiang's ideas have been fundamental to that development. His vision is that the universe is both, well, let me put it like this. It's a naturalistic view of the universe as more or less a physical system, but it also eschews causal explanations of the whole in a way that you have to, in a way. The whole universe is a kind of spontaneous or improvisational upwelling. There's no explanation for the whole. Even Stephen Hawking thinks that, I think, for example. Or Edgar Allan Poe in his amazing cosmological essay, Eureka. And then each part of the universe could be understood not in terms of some kind of mechanical causation in which current events, are understood, and objects that exist now are to be understood in a mechanical causal sequence, but as part of this spontaneous upwelling of the whole. That sounds pretty damn vague, and in a way, it's pretty vague and fragmentary in Kuo Hsiang too. But let's look at some passages, though. I think this is really a very beautiful text, and I was proud to have sort of gathered it up. So, I numbered into 80 short passages, again by analogy to the Tao Te Ching, although mostly not verse, give prose. It's a natural way to do this text because the Chuang Tzu consists of interpolations, brief interpolations in the text of the Chuang Tzu. All right, so let's try number 9 as I reckon it. Nothing makes nature what it is. So that could be the Tao makes nature what it is, if the Tao is nothing. The translation of the first line of the Tao Te Ching in my version was, "This book can tell you nothing." Nothing makes nature what it is. Nothing owns nature or possesses anything. Nature is not a hierarchy in which some things obey other things. Each thing is what it is. That is the way. I think that if you look at Western cosmologies, Western metaphysical systems, you will find an obsession with a hierarchical order of beings. In Plato, in the Great Chain of Being, even in Kant, Hegel, you want to order the universe into a set of beings in which some beings obey other beings, some beings are high, some beings are low, and so on. That would be totally incompatible with Taoism and certainly with Kuo Hsiang's version of it. Or try this. This is 15. This will be familiar to you if you've read the Chuang Tzu. It's a commentary on a passage in the Chuang Tzu. I mean, all these are, but this is directly tied. The huge bird and the little bird have different goals, but they are not conscious of pursuing them. They're naturally different, and there is no decent explanation of why. That's what Chuang Tzu means by roaming or freedom. Each thing has its own necessity, and each thing has its spontaneity, and these are, finally, the same thing. The universe, in its unfolding, is both spontaneous and necessary. All right? This is pretty interesting. Like, think about a Louis Armstrong trumpet solo, all right? Or cornet solo early on. It's spontaneous. Maybe you never played the same solo twice exactly. And yet it's necessary. If you hear it several times, you realize, in some sense, it has to be what it is. And that's why Louis Armstrong was a genius. And that sort of improvisation, or perfectly being what you are spontaneously, is an image of the arts. It's an image of human action in the world. And it's an image that joins human action in the world to the nature of the whole. It makes human action, among other things, everything else, perfectly natural in that sense. Both spontaneous and necessary. And those are different ways of saying the same thing. All right. I thought I'd share some of the more, like I say, a lot of them are just sort of cryptic little pieces of advice. But deep. But there's an underlying metaphysics of a sort that you don't usually get in Taoist or, for example, Zen Buddhist type texts. Occasionally. But I think this runs about as deep as metaphysics can run, though it's awfully brief. And this is the sort of metaphysics that I endorse. In some ways, it takes on a lot of the questions that you might run into in the pre-Socratics. Some of the arguments remind one of the Eleatic philosophers, such as Parmenides, but they reach very different conclusions. This is the one I number 59. What does not exist cannot produce things that exist. How then is existence possible? Guess what? There is no explanation. Things spontaneously produce themselves. That's really all there is to metaphysics. The self cannot produce things, and it cannot be produced. Things are not created intentionally. The self exists for itself, in itself, simply in virtue of being what it is. That means that there are no overall explanations, because the principle of existence and action in each thing is that thing, and the principle of existence and action in each thing is that thing and emerges spontaneously. The word Tian, nature or heaven, means the spontaneity or play of things, not the blue sky, though the sky too might be a place to play. 61. Not only is it impossible for not being to become being, it is impossible for being to become not being. Again, this is going to remind people who studied it of Parmenides, I think. So from where and how do things, and for that matter the absence of things, arise? What came first? If we say yin and yang came first, how did they come? From where? From what? Maybe nature came first, but nature is only another name for beings. Suppose I say the Tao came first, but the Tao is only another name for not being. So how can it arise? There must be another thing or not thing, and so on infinitely. When you get down to it, we cannot say anything except that things just are, that they arise spontaneously and spontaneously disappear. 62. Everything is alike in that it is part of nature, but nothing knows itself or commands itself consciously, including us, I would say. Everything changes all the time. The world is always in process, but nothing commands things to change. They change themselves and one another spontaneously by the simple emergence of their own nature or the nature in them. Leave things alone and things will be perfectly realized without your help. Things seem to be directed by an intelligence, but in fact, each simply does what it is. Let that happen. It will happen in any case. 63. You can trace the causes of things infinitely, or else you come to a first cause. But is there a first cause, a creator, or is there not? Obviously, if there is not, he can't create anything, and if there is, he himself is spontaneously self-created. Either way, all things emerge spontaneously. Stuff just keeps happening. Everything emerges in an uncontrolled improvisation, whether there is a creator or not. Nothing, therefore, is commanded by anything else. That's the truth. And, I think maybe that is the truth. Anyway, I think this really is it's a classic Taoist text, and it's also expresses one of the deepest alternatives in metaphysics, I think, and one that you just don't get in the West, or I'd have to try to figure out what the parallel views would be in the West that take this kind of spontaneous view of human action and of the universe in which human action takes place. All right? Good enough. Catch you later.